Our second reading comes to us from the Gospel of John. It is found in John chapter 4. It is lengthy, and I will probably skip around a little bit, so just bear with me. Now, when Jesus learned that the Pharisee had heard Jesus is making and baptizing more disciples than John, although it was not Jesus himself, but his disciples who baptized, he left Judea and started back to Galilee. But he had to go through Samaria. So he came to a Samaritan city called Sychar, near the plot of ground that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired out by his journey, was sitting by the well. It was about noon. A Samaritan woman came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." His disciples had gone to the city to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask a drink of me, a woman of Samaria?" Jews do not share things in common with Samaritans. Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saving you, who is saying to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him and he would have given you living water." The woman said to him, "Sir, you have no bucket and the well is deep. Where do you get that living water? Are you greater than our ancestor Jacob, who gave us the well and with his sons and his flocks drank from it?" Jesus said to her, "Everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again. But those who drink of the water that I will give them will never be thirsty. The water that I will give will become in them a spring of water gushing up to eternal life." And the woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so that I may never be thirsty or have to keep coming here to draw water." Jesus said to her, "Go, call your husband and come back." The woman answered him, "I have no husband." And Jesus said to her, "You are right in saying, 'I have no husband,' for you have had 5 husbands, and the one you have now is not your husband. The woman said to him, "Sir, I see that you are a prophet. Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you say that the place where people must worship is in Jerusalem." Jesus said to her, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You worship what you worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. But the hour is coming, and is now here, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father seeks such as these to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth." The woman said to him, "I know that Messiah is coming, who is called Christ. When he comes, he will proclaim all things to us." Jesus said to her, "I am he, the one who is speaking to you." Just then his disciples came, and they were astonished that he was speaking with a woman. But no one said, "What do you want?" or "Why are you speaking with her?" And then the woman left her water jar and went back to the city. She said to the people, "Come and see a man who told me everything I have ever done. He cannot be the Messiah, can he?" They left the city, and they were on their way to him. Meanwhile, the disciples were urging him, "Rabbi, eat something." But he said to them, "I have food to eat that you do not know about." And so the disciples said to one another, "Surely no one has brought him something to eat." And Jesus said to them, "My food is to do the will of him who sent me and to complete his work. Do not say, 'For months more, then comes the harvest.' But I tell you, look around you and see, the fields are ripe for harvesting. The reaper is already receiving wages and is gathering fruit for eternal life, so that sower and reaper may rejoice together." This is the word of the Lord. There's more. You can read on if you like. There are plenty of people in our midst who understand what it feels like to be invisible, what it means to go about your life being unseen by people around you. But there is also a special group of people who have worked very hard to make sure they stay invisible. Some people trying to be invisible on purpose, people walking through the world as ghosts, afraid of being seen by others around them, afraid of others knowing the truths that they carry, the brokenness that weighs them down, the sin that plagues their worry. It's an active decision to become invisible, to escape the hostility and fear of a judgmental world. Today we meet a woman a Samaritan woman, who is doing something that seems relatively pedestrian. She is going to the well to get water. Although this is not an ordinary thing that she is doing, because she is going at the wrong time of the day. Everybody else goes in the morning when it's not warm, where all the other women will talk to each other and socialize, and there is chatter, and there is busyness, and there are things happening. This woman did not choose that time of the day to go to the well. She decided that she was going to go at the hottest point of the day when nobody else would be there, that she would face the oppressive sun rather than face the oppressive people. She didn't want to see the disappointed looks anymore, the stares. She didn't want to hear the whispers anymore. And so she may well have started her life going about her morning in the busy chatter of other women. But slowly, she began to fade away on purpose. She walked to the well in the middle of the heat, not because she loved the sun, but because she was hiding from the violent purity of the people around her. There isn't anyone in touch with their humanity who doesn't understand this woman, who doesn't know what it means to be this woman, who hasn't walked through life trying desperately not to be seen, for fear that what you are or who you are will prompt rejection or violence or expulsion from some great sacred place. I wonder sometimes, do we all have places where we go to be unseen? Do we all have noonday wells that we hide at when we don't want to be noticed? Do we have a well that we go to in the middle of the day to try to hide from God so that God won't see the truth either? See how unworthy we are, how sinful we are, how not ready we are to be the prophets or the missionaries for Christ. And she goes to this well at this horrible time of the day in the blaring heat to get her water where she won't be seen, but on this day it's different. On this day it's different because somebody is already there. And guess what? He shouldn't be there either. But Jesus is there for the right reasons. He's exhausted and he is thirsty, and there is a well. And she meets Jesus, and here comes Jesus into this situation that first and foremost he should never have been in. Jesus should not have engaged in conversation with a woman, let alone a Samaritan woman. But this is Jesus. And so one of the reasons that this story has become so important, and one of the reasons that I like it so much, is that if you were ever going to ask yourself, has there ever been a moment where Jesus just kind of walked into a place and broke every rule at once? It's here. Jesus doesn't just break one rule in this passage, he breaks a bunch of rules. Jesus, it seems, has very little interest in social convention. Jesus has very little interest in political status quo. Jesus has very little interest in the cultural demands of the time. Jesus, in fact, is a transcendent figure. He transcends all of those things. Jesus rejects the idea that morality is some rigid weapon used to beat each other down, or that it cannot change, or that people cannot change. What Jesus talks about, we've talked about many times. It's the constancy of grace. The thing that never changes is God's love. Human standards will shift, history will change, experiences will change. Grace is not selectively doled out based on all of those very human things. It is given freely all the time at every step throughout the journey. But I think Jesus did something even more radical than that. I think the first act that Jesus did in this moment was to see somebody who was not supposed to be seen. Jesus begins his healing by making someone visible, seen by him, seen by God, with all the blemishes that she was trying to hide from her neighbors, or at least trying to escape from. Jesus looks at her and says, "Give me a drink of water," as if to say, guess what? Despite all of this, you are still worthy to give me a drink of water. I will still drink your water if nobody else will, because God does not see people the way we do. God looks past the supposed ways we are supposed to judge one another, the moralities that we are supposed to heap upon one another, the ways we are supposed to punish each other for falling short of these things. Jesus says, no. Instead, I will see you for who you truly are, beyond the brokenness, beyond the blemishes, behind the Band-Aids. I will look at the you that is still healing and still growing and still changing. And I will reconcile myself to that person, blemishes and all. Because this is the God who reaches out to those who seem unlovable, who seem lost, who seem least. The God who refuses to be restricted by human boundaries around questionable backgrounds or questionable behaviors. Jesus says, no, sin is a burden and you should not carry it anymore. Your mistakes are a burden that you should be able to get rid of. Being seen by Jesus is an invitation to drop the inventory of your mistakes and the checklist of your faults and throw them down the well once and for all. Jesus gets it. We are people. We are people. People have pasts, and sometimes those pasts are messy and weird. But we also have something incredible called agency, and that means that we are not defined by our histories the way we want to think we are. That we can survive the brokenness and become better, stronger people, to overcome and transcend the things that we have used to define us and hold us back for far, far, far too long. Because when Jesus looks at a human being, Jesus sees the whole human being. He sees people who are capable of faith and love, people who are capable of shame and sadness, people who carry their burdens and carry their unique sins to the well. People who have been driven to the heat of the midday sun, by the hate of others around them, or by the burden of their own sin. This is what makes grace such a scandalous gift. Because she gets to have it anyway. And so do you. Each of us harbors a Samaritan woman. Each of us trying to meet the divine at some well to get some sense of life, to be freed from the things that have defined us for too long and held us back for too long, understanding that the only thing that cannot change is the grace of God, which is always available, always there, and always working. Sit in the grace of God. Drink in the grace of God. Because the rest of the world can be renegotiated. Values and norms, those things can be redefined and restructured. God's grace is not. That is the anchor of our faith. That is the anchor that allows a Samaritan woman to talk to Jesus Christ when she is not supposed to. And the first act, the first thing Jesus does is just notice that she's there. I'm on a 7 kick. I've been making lists of 7 things when I've been doing stuff for some reason. But there is, guess what? A 7-fold nature to the healing that's in this encounter with Jesus, right? There are certain things that happen here that I think are important, right? There is, of course, an act of healing. We don't really think of it that way because we think of this as a forgiveness story, a Jesus accepting other people's story, right? But there is an act of healing. Jesus is offering healing to this woman, a reminder that she is worthy of being seen in the same way that we are all worthy of being seen, a reminder that she still has value in the world no matter how hard she tries to hide from it. This is an act of healing. What Jesus is healing is the pain inflicted upon this woman by others, and the pain inflicted on her by herself in response to the other. This is an act of reconciliation. This is God reaching out for somebody who clearly sees herself as too sinful to be seen by regular and decent society. Somebody who drags herself out in the heat of the day to avoid the gaze of her fellow neighbors. This is God reaching out for that woman, that single person in this single place, in this single act, looking at her, knowing her, and reconciling himself to her. Teaching her what it is that we are supposed to judge each other by, and the things we need to give up as tools of our judgment. This is an act of liberation. Forgiveness by God is one of the most significant acts of liberation in the life of the Christian human being. To be liberated from the weight and burden of your shame and your sin is a kind of liberation that frees you truly to do the work of God in the world unfettered by the judgment and the blame of the rest of our culture. It is liberation from the things we use to hide ourselves from society. It is liberation from the prejudices and the bigotries and the things that limit our ability to form communities of people. It is an act of prophecy. You have a past. You have a life. You are a complex mess of a human being, and you are human, very human, deeply human. But you are also made of endless possibility. You are also made of prophetic promise to do something better and something different. You have the power to make prophetic choices, to transcend the brokenness of the moment and anchor yourself in a hope that comes from somewhere much bigger. This moment with Jesus is also an invitation to look deeply at yourself. To be seen by Jesus is an invitation to see yourself as Jesus sees you. Not as your checklist of things I have done wrong throughout my life, not your inventory of sins that I have committed or mistakes I have made, failures in my life, but as a whole human being. Jesus sees it all. A person capable of faith and love, capable of the things that may be used against us, but still capable of transcending the things that we use to hurt one another. Because if you know yourself, how can they hold it against you? And if you love yourself, how can you let them take God's love away from you, even though they are trying? And the obvious thing about this story, of course, is that Jesus has transcended a whole host of conventions in one action. Jesus has dismissed the cultural, the political, the ideological conventions of the time because Jesus, guess what, doesn't really care what the cultural, political, and ideological conventions of the time are. There is this idea that somehow Jesus is bound to the morality of his moment, that somehow Jesus has not moved beyond ancient times, that Jesus does not live in this time, in this moment. That is a mistake. Jesus is not a fixed thing. Jesus is not a thing that cannot move and cannot live and cannot enter our world. The message of the woman at the well remains vital precisely because it refuses to excuse her treatment based on the history of the moment or the customs of the time or the status quo of her day. Jesus doesn't say, yes, you're suffering, but I get it. That's how it is now. That's how our culture is, right? And then he does something that he does to all of us. He kicks her out and says, go now. You have been healed. You have been unburdened. You have been liberated. Go out and do this now. You are now a disciple, an evangelist. You are the person now that will carry this message to many other people. And she did. And she was apparently really good at it. But nobody would have seen that had Jesus not seen her first. And then finally, let me close with this idea. There is nothing extraordinary in the basics of the picture that is painted here. This is a pretty pedestrian scene. A woman going to a well to get some water. Whoopee, right? Jesus sitting at the well, tired and thirsty. Okay, they have a conversation. Hardly the stuff, right, of blinding miracles and being knocked off horses and oceans parting that you may walk across them, right? Not a giant miraculous scene. No light beams down on this woman. She doesn't shake or speak in tongues. There is no weird thing that happens, right? And I mention this because I think this scene proves a point that I find absolutely lovely in God's nature, and that is that God works through a lot of ordinary miracles, a lot of things that happen in very ordinary situations, right? In the midday heat at a well, a woman and a guy having a conversation, it will change her life forever. Because what God does, God doesn't wait for some grand stage to enter your life, right? God's interruption happens in the ordinary. God interrupts our ordinary days. God interrupts our ordinary things. God interrupts the mundane. It is the voice that breaks the silence of our ordinariness, of our everyday patterns. Grace interrupts the ordinary. That is what it does. That is why it is so miraculous, because it can happen in the most mundane places and cause significant transformation. She came to get water and go home. She did not come to change the city. She did not come to lead people to God. She came to get water. And that ordinary errand made her a pivotal human being in the faith and life of so many other people around her, an entire community transformed by her experience. The point is that the miracle she showed up to here was a routine moment, an ordinary thing. It's an invitation for us to recognize that sometimes the divine is already sitting there waiting for us in boring places. We don't have to fall off horses, and we don't have to look for giant dramatic scenes. We just have to pay attention and let yourself hear God even in those mundane moments. That is what an ordinary miracle is. It is the love of God and the grace of God and the power of God punching a hole in your regular day. Putting the people in front of you that you didn't want to be put in front of you. Putting the people in front of you that need your love that day. God leading you throughout the world, asking you to spread kindness with every person you encounter. Asking you to see Jesus in every human being, from the grocery store to the bus to the bank. That's where God shows up. God shows up on Main Street. God shows up in the faces of people that challenge us and threaten us. Do you have an ordinary place to meet God? I think the Samaritan woman is a brilliant story. I think it's one of the most important stories in the entire Gospels. I happen to think that John especially highlights it for very particular reasons, and the reason is, I think, at its fundamental core, is that Jesus cannot be bound by all of these very earthly human things, that Jesus will not live in a world where he has to abide by the same conventions and standards that everybody else thinks he should abide by. Jesus does not enter the world to take on our bigotries and our problems and our discomfort. Jesus comes to challenge those things and say, look at your neighbors, stop hiding from your neighbors, make them see you, stand out, show yourself, tell them who you are, and then tell them why you matter. Because if there is any message that comes from Jesus in this moment, dealing with this woman, this invisible woman who had spent so much of her life trying so hard to be a ghost, to be unseen, unbelieved in, unthought of, Jesus made her a prophet. Prophets often come from places of very real human experience. But I think the message to the woman at the well, the message to you listening to this, the message to me saying these words is very simple. Jesus looks into the eyes of the person who feels invisible and says, you matter too. You have value too. Your voice matters too. All of us carry with us some routine, some midday visit to the well, something that we hide, something that we don't want to know ourselves or we don't want others to know, some things that we worry that if somebody knew this, what would they think of me, right? If God knew this, what would God think of me, right? If God knew this, what would God think of me, right? If God knew this, what would God think of me, right? If God knew this, what would God think of me, right? If God knew this, what would God think of me, right? If God knew this, what would God think of me, right? If God knew this, what would God think of me, right? If God knew this, what would God think of me, right? If God knew this, what would God think of me, right? If God knew this, what would God think of me, right? If God knew this, what would God think of me, right? If God knew this, what would God think of me, right? If God knew this, what would God think of me, right? If God knew this, what would God think of me, right? If God knew this, what would God think of me, right? If God knew this, what would God think of me, right? If God knew this, what would God think of me, right? If God knew this, what would God think of me, right? If God knew this, what would God think of me, right? If God knew this, what would God think of me, right? If God knew this, what would God think of me, right? If God k Jesus comes to the well to say, yes, yep, you tried really hard to come here to be unseen, to be invisible, but guess what? I saw you anyway. Now I want you to be seen by everyone. And I want you to tell them that they matter too. That is her mission. That is our mission. Let's not make any more ghosts. Let's start seeing each other. Amen.